This is the final Mad Scientist Tea Party for the year. Oh, yes. It has been my pleasure to be the host all this year. My name is Scotty. I'm a performance poet from Brisbane under the stage name of Darkwing Dubs. So, for some reason, because of my profession as a poet who knows very little about science, they've kind of thought to marry that with the very, very smart people in the science with the very, very basic, crude person that I am, and kind of see what happens. And it's kicked off, and we've had great sold-out events here, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful way to share and celebrate scientific minds, talking to everyone from peers through to young people. How old are you guys? You're 13. And you're 12. Cool. Are you here because you want to hear about science, or did someone rope you in? Bit of both. All right. I love the honesty. All right. We've got a big schedule tonight. We've got 3 guest speakers as opposed to our usual one, and we've got 4 short 5-minute speakers as opposed to our usual maybe 1 or 2 that we have. So it's a really great way to end the night. We've got a beautiful clear sky. We've got a telescope over there that in our break, please try and check out some stars, or alternatively, there's heaps of windows to peer into. Not that I'm encouraging that kind of thing. Because it's the last one, I am going to start off with a poem. This poem is about a circle. All right? Got that? It's about a circle. That's the theme, you know? It's all good. Right. A circle grew up in a little hole in the crater of a meteor. She was very happy and very healthy. She played lots of games like soccer, lawn bowls, and frisbee, and she especially loved the hula hoop, and she never got scurvy because she ate lots of oranges. She hated new moons, half-eaten pies, and fart jokes. She liked making pikelets, sitting in her tire swing, and watching the sunset. Sometimes at night she would wear an eye patch, pretend she was a cyclops, and jump out and scare people. As she grew, she developed a halo above her head, spinning atop her curls. She found shapes with jagged edges, took them to the planetarium to peer at the eclipse, and watched them smooth themselves out as gravity let go of their shoulders. She gave an 18-year-old with an eating disorder a djembe to distract her from measuring her circumference by 3.2 r squared. Let silver coins slip into plastic cups as those stuck in a loop of drugs and violence watch raindrops ripple out in puddles on the sidewalk. She wrote in analog time, cut out clock faces, and made them into dot paintings. Camera lenses peered at her work as open-mouthed buyers punctuated their sentences with, "Oh." When men fell into orbit around her, they would tell her that they loved her curves, her rosy cheeks, and her belly button, but they couldn't fathom that her iris was the eye of a storm, her face a cyclone, and she wound herself in a cycle of loves that could only end in a ring of fire. She loved like her orbit could pull meteors to Earth. She loved like the hole beneath her feet could swallow planets. She loved like the halo above her head was a buzzing furnace where rings were forged from gold, and the spots behind her eyelids were the faces of artists she'd illegally burned to CD. She was beautiful in all her roundabout ways, a real bubble of personality where the horizon follows the curve of the earth and the earth follows the curve of her life, and life is a full circle. Thank you. Let's go. Let's get into it. That's nice. You have to clap because I'm the host. All right, we've got a very, very special first speaker. He was at my spoken science workshops the other week. Right brain and left brain thinkers clashing together and exploding into something, some sort of goo. And this first speaker is going to come up and share his profession, share what he loves, maybe share something crazy, something normal, something abstract, something purposeful or useful or not so useful. It doesn't matter. It's a Mad Scientist Tea Party. Let's make a big round of applause for our very first speaker of the night, the wonderful Nick.
Hello. Well, thanks for that. I've taken this opportunity because I do consider myself a scientist, and one thing that I'm not very good at yet is speaking about what I like to do, the science that I like to do. So please, I hope that what I do is at least in some way of use for you. My journey in science has taken a lot of forms, so I'd like to try and describe some of the things that I've done along the way and kind of what my work is now, and some of it might be a little bit weird or crazy. So I started off, I've done a science degree, and as part of that I did a major in mathematics, and I worked on some interesting research along the way. I worked as part of a research team that were doing collusion-resistant fingerprinting of digital audio. As you may or may not know, a digital audio file is just a long string of numbers that, to massively oversimplify it, describe where the speaker should sit in its position as it moves in and out. And if you're interested in trying to hide some information in that digital audio, for which there's a whole range of uses, then one way to do that would just be to take each of those numbers and alter them just slightly, and then you would have managed to hide some information in that audio. And that goes that's called steganography. That goes all the way back to people making log files before there log tables before there were computers. So people would spend a whole lot of time writing out log files, and so that you couldn't just copy the log files and pass them on to someone else who hasn't paid for them, they made very slight errors which identified the person that they'd sold those log tables to. But unfortunately, people decided to get around that and steal the log tables by taking a whole bunch of different tables and averaging out the differences, so that would clean up the table and get rid of the information that was hidden there. And that's called collusion. So some very clever people decided that they would try and produce some collusion-resistant fingerprinting. And the way that they did that was to take sections of the audio, convert that into the frequency spectrum by doing a Fourier transform on that data, so that you get a whole set of new numbers which, instead of describing speaker positions, now describe the strength of the frequency of a sound over that interval, and make changes in that frequency spectrum, which spreads the change out over the data rather than it being in one single position, which makes it slightly harder to then average out and get rid of the differences. But if someone was just clever enough to make a Fourier transform, then they could average out the differences and steal the data. So we took some perfect arrays that have this very clever property that if you transform the array at all, if you do a horizontal or vertical transformation of that array by moving it along and taking the end bit and putting it back on the side, if you multiply that with the original array, you get 0. The only time that the array has a positive value is when it's multiplied with itself. What that meant was that if people tried to get rid of the information that was hidden in there by averaging out the differences, they would think they've gotten rid of it, but when that perfect array was taken and multiplied through all of the data that made up that audio file, you would get peaks at the position of the perfect array that was used to identify that person. So that would then make that collusion resistant. I've as part of that degree, I also did some work with a guy whose specialty was, he was a mathematician that explored collisions of black holes, which I thought was a very cool thing to explore. And with him, we took a ray tracer, which is a piece of software that produces an image from a mathematical description of a world. So a mathematical description of, say there's a sphere at this position of a certain colour and a cube at this position of a different colour and a camera here, and that their software then traces the path of rays from the camera into the scene and finds, by a mathematical calculation, finds what it colours a certain pixel based on what object that ray hit. So we rather than use that simple mathematics, we use the Schwarzschild metric for a black hole, which is created by, first of all, discarding the basic axiom that describes a Euclidean space. That's getting a bit technical. So rather than assuming that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, you get rid of that assumption, build up a whole new mathematics that, well, some very clever people did that describes how light actually bends as it approaches a black hole. So rather than just finding where that ray hit by just calling it a straight line, we solved a differential equation at each point as it stepped along a curved line that was curved based on where the black hole was, and got some very interesting and great animations of a black hole moving across the scene. I did a computer science degree, and as part of that, evolved virtual creatures in a physically accurate simulated environment, and using a very simple neural architecture with just blocks with sensors and motors between the blocks, evolved some actually very interesting behavior, symmetrical gates, and really quite fascinating with a very, very simple structure underneath. So from then, I've gone on to do medicine. I'm at the end of my medical degree, and as part of that, I've done some research into the evidence behind early intervention for psychosis, and the relevance of Descartes' philosophy of the mind-body problem in modern-day psychiatry and its applications. But when I was asked to do this, and I initially declined because it scared the crap out of me, the idea of standing up here, and the question was like, well, the offer was get up and talk about your work, and I mean I don't know exactly what my work is, but in trying to answer that question, really I think that one research question it defines my work and has defined a lot of my life, and that research question is really how does a person break free of the prison of mental illness and gain the freedom of mental health. And that's a question that's relevant to me because I have been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is a lovely combination of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. It's possibly the nastiest mother of mental illnesses. And as a part of my journey, I've spent a lot of time with people with mental illness, and we are a wonderful bunch of people. I don't think there's no need to be scared of people with mental illness. That the statistics show that they're much more likely to be a victim of violence than to actually be a perpetrator of violence. And as a group, people with mental illness are about as likely to commit violence as young males. So I think some of the stereotypes are unfounded. But in looking at that research question, that's sort of why I did medicine, and I'm right now doing a rotation in child and adolescent mental health. And so far, two interesting discoveries that I've come across. One is that I really don't think that a mental health unit is where true healing occurs. And you might say, duh, well that's quite obvious, but that was an interesting discovery for me. And out of that, I'm very interested now in trying to, from a science background, with the approach of science, try and create communities that will actually foster healing for people with mental illness. The other discovery there that I'm really interested in is the power of an empty space. I've done a lot of reading of sort of Buddhist ideas, and I remember I read a fantasy series called The Wheel of Time, where a guy in there describes the flame and the void, where he feeds all of his thoughts and fears and anger into the flame and creates the void, and that allows him to do kind of really cool stuff. And just in talking to young people that have been through some really, really horrific stuff in their life and are now suffering because of that, what I think just by creating an empty space, any of my own thoughts, stuff, reactions to what they're saying that comes up, just get rid of that and just keep an empty space. And it's a very powerful, I believe, healing process. And so really I think that one of the things that I wanted to say as part of this was just that as scientists, I think that one of the tool that we all kind of share is the mind. And I think that as a part of practicing science, we can all do some science in our own inner world and observe our minds and learn from what we see there. So thank you for the opportunity. I hope it wasn't too crazy or strange, but that's my take on science. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Can we give him another big round of applause? Thank you, Nick. He's our first speaker for the evening, and he's given us some incredibly vulnerable insights there. All right, our next speaker is the lovely Anna. I saw her just before. She was another one from our spoken science workshops, and I'd like you all to give a big round of applause for Anna, our next 5-minute speaker.
So, words and their meanings are the building blocks of language. I'll start again. Am I on? Yep. Okay. So, words and their meanings are the building blocks of language. And using language is one of the main ways that we communicate. It's how we express our thoughts and our feelings, how we exchange information with each other. It's one of the things that makes us human. Imagine if you found yourself in another country, or maybe to keep into the theme with the night, you somehow were transported through time and space to another planet in another cosmos. Think about the immense difficulty you'd have communicating with the other life forms there. The frustration, the social isolation that you might begin to feel. Now, just come back to Earth. Imagine that something happened in your brain that meant that you could no longer understand all the words that someone says to you, or you couldn't find and produce the words that you wanted to say. Think about the impact that this would have on your life. This might give you a vague idea of what someone might experience if they have acquired a language or communication disorder. Maybe because they've suffered a stroke, or they have a brain injury, or a brain disease. This is fundamentally what drives my research in the field of language neuroscience. Language neuroscience essentially combines research within two fields: the study of language, so how we process words and their meanings, and the other area is the study of brain structure and function. So I research how language is processed in the brain and also what happens when something goes wrong. Think of the brain as a house. It's the scaffolding, the rooms, the structure. Our neurotransmitters, the brain's chemical messages, are what goes through the pipes, the plumbing. Our neurons, the brain cells, are the electrical wiring. I'm trying to gain the knowledge of a language building surveyor. I want to understand in what rooms the word bricks are located and how they're laid out. I want to know what kind of brain chemicals are required in the different language pipes and how the electrical activity and the setup of the neural wiring supports language. And we can think of the different brain problems that result in language disorders as different problems with the house. Stroke is a truck ploughing into the house and demolishing the sitting room, or maybe a more vital part like the kitchen. Tiny mini strokes are like hail damage. Parkinson's disease is like rotting in the floorboards. Alzheimer's like termites. Having the knowledge of a language building surveyor will ultimately help us improve language therapies for people with acquired language disorders. So it might help us to optimize refurbishments after damage, or how to make a room multi-purpose, how to make a room take on a function of a damaged room. We could even maybe work out how to slow the progression of the damage, or how to keep up and maintain the quality of the house, or at least some of its rooms and its bricks. So that's the big picture. So what kind of tools do I use? What kind of projects might I be involved in? Well, a lot of the research use healthy people with no brain complications, so we can work out what actually goes on normally. Other projects use people with brain disorders, like the two groups that I usually work with are people with Parkinson's and people with aphasia. And aphasia is just a term that describes all the language difficulties that you might have after a stroke, so after the truck plows into the house. My research typically uses single words, so it's at the single brick level. So I might get you to do things like decide whether a word is a real word or not. I might get you to learn a new name for an object that you haven't seen before. I might get you to decide whether two words are related or not, like doctor in hospital or doctor in shoe, which aren't related. The neuroscience tools that I use can involve things like brain imaging. So we can get a 3D image of the brain that helps to look at the structure, or we can get a 3D movie of the brain that helps to give ideas on which parts of or which rooms are involved in language processing. I also use EEG, which looks at the electrical activity over the scalp that your brain generates. And another thing that I use is drug administration. So we might use a drug to increase the chemical within certain language pipes, or we might use a drug that decreases the flow of the chemical. And just to finish, a couple of projects that demonstrate the kind of things that I work on is one study where I've got to go into surgery for people that are having deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's. And so when they're in surgery, I've got to go in and get them to do a language task in the middle of the surgery. And while they're doing the task, we're recording from the electrodes, which are in the deep structures of the brain. And so we can look at those recordings and see what happens. Another study involves people with aphasia and healthy people. And we're getting them to go into a brain scanner, and while they're in there, we get them to name pictured objects. So I get to meet lots of interesting participants, people with certain diseases and their families, and I get to think a lot and I get to theorize. It's pretty cool. And I get to work with some pretty neat people. So I work with people from varied academic backgrounds, like physicists and engineers and neurologists. So it's pretty cool. So I hope that this spoken science speech has given you a little idea on what language neuroscience is all about and what I do. And I hope that it makes you think a little bit about how miraculous and cool your own brain language house is. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Keep up that round of applause as she moves back to her seat. I was about to say speech. There you go, language neuroscience. Our final 5-minute speaker, he's the local boy. He's the Edge's own. Give him a big roaring round of applause. The beautiful, lovely, bearded Mick.
Hey, I'm just going to quickly tell you about the Astro Fashion workshops that we've been running at the Edge over the last 3 months. There's a couple of people who've been to these workshops, and also Katie Francis, who's going to be speaking later tonight, was one of the facilitators. During the workshops, there was 3 sessions. In the first session, we went up to hang out with all the amateur astronomers at the Brisbane Astronomical Society's monthly night out at the Mount Cootha lookout, and we took images of the moon and some stars. Second session, we got together and learnt about turning some of those images and images that we'd gotten off the internet from various sources into fabric designs. And then in the third workshop, we turned those designs which we'd had printed up onto Lycra into tights. And it looks like some people have made stuff like shirts or dresses. So yeah, come up and have a look when it's all over at the handiwork of the people. And if you're interested in stuff like that, we will be running some more design-oriented workshops in our next programming period around designing cosplay costumes. The other thing I should mention is that people made swing tags as well. So there's some of the swing tags that people made for their garments. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mick. If you do those again, can you make hats? Because I think my hat would have to have a black hole on the head. Get it? Yeah. No? I thought it was funny. You don't find that funny at all? No. All right. Never mind then. Beautiful. That's our 3 5-minute speakers. Now we're going to extend that, up the ante a bit. We've got the next speaker before we have our first break, and you can peer into people's windows, etc., or do whatever you want to. Is a guy called David, and he is going to be talking a bit about the Big Bang, which if I was to design something, I think would if I was to have like the Big Bang somewhere on my clothing, I don't know, I could think of a few places that it could be, but I don't think they're appropriate for 12 or 13. Okay, let's with no more further ado, let's introduce our very first guest speaker of the night, the amazing David. He's going to be talking about all things Big Bang and universe, etc., etc. I'll give you the mic, mate. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Please give me a second while I get my slides together. Amazingly, it works. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you also very much for the opportunity to speak in such a venue. I've given a number of public talks. This is my first stadium gig, I think. My first outdoor gig. There are no lasers, though. I was hoping for lasers. I'm just going to have to, press on, despite my disappointment. So I've been asked to speak about the Big Bang, the Big Bang Theory. So, as you all know, the Big Bang Theory is a comedy TV series currently airing on terrestrial TV. No, I'm not really going to talk about Sheldon Cooper. I'm more interested in talking about this guy. So this is a young Albert Einstein. And without Einstein, I can't really impress upon you how important Einstein's theory is to the study of the universe, because Einstein's theory of gravity is the universal force, is everything. And so his theory, general relativity as it's called, it describes not only the stuff that's inside the universe, but space-time itself. And so to talk about the universe, the Big Bang being the creation of the universe, we're not merely talking about the creation of stars and planets and cats and people and tables. We're talking about the creation of space and time. It all happened instantly. It wasn't like there was a sort of blackboard there, sitting there, waiting for matter, waiting for stuff to be injected into it. When stuff exists, time and space itself exists. You can't decouple one from the other. And so to talk about before the Big Bang, before the creation of the universe, doesn't make any sense because there is no sort of time before. Having said that, I will, at the very end of my talk, contradict myself. So you guys can look forward to that one. So I'm a scientist. I work with evidence. I work with data, with things which tell us about how the real world, as we understand it, works. And so with the Big Bang, there are really three. There's like a tripod of evidence. And I'm going to go through each of these individually. And so at the end, you might have sort of some idea about why we believe the universe had a beginning, where our understanding of this comes from. So the three pieces of evidence are the expansion of the universe, which is called the Hubble expansion, the leftover radiation from the Big Bang, the scream that we can kind of hear, the creation scream of the universe, which is still echoing around the universe today, and the creation of matter, the nucleosynthesis, we've got the creation of all matter in the universe. And so these three things, the expansion, the leftover scream, the leftover signal of the Big Bang, and the creation of matter are really the building blocks of evidence which cause us to believe the universe had a beginning. So I'll start with point one in any tripartite discussion. I'm being pretentious now, excuse me for a second. So we measure distances in the universe. The universe is a big place. It's really hard to measure distances. We have most distances you can measure by going somewhere. If you want to know how far it is to Sydney, you can get in your car, you can drive there. If you want to know how far it is outside the world, though, you have to start doing surveying. You have to start looking at things and going, okay, is that cow in the distance a really, really big cow, or is it an ordinary sized cow which is really, really far away? And so we do the same thing in cosmology. We look at objects and we go, okay, is that object really, really bright or just really, really close to us? And so we build up what's called a distance ladder. So the distance ladder allows us to measure things, right? It's hard to measure things because they're so far away. We can't drive to the nearest star. We can't drive to the nearest galaxy. We can't make direct measurements. We have to build up the evidence from things that we understand, from physics that we understand. So this is an example of the distance ladder. You can kind of ignore it, basically, because all you have to understand is that we make connections. We build up small distances into larger distances. But the real key here is the idea of a standard candle. So imagine that you're in a dark field and your friend is standing at the other end of a dark field with a torch, and he's shining the torch at you. But you can also see a distant star. And you can compare the light that's coming at you from the torch with the light that's coming at you from the star. And you can go, but I know how far away my friend is. I know how far away my friend is with the torch. And I then can, just by the comparison of the brightness, I can work out how far away the star is. But this works only if you know how bright the torch is that your friend is carrying and how bright the star is. So the torch, if you give the guy the torch beforehand, that's fine. You assume that he hasn't turned up with a dim torch just to confuse you. But the star is slightly harder. In order to have an object out there in the sky where you absolutely know every single time, and not just one object, but every single time, hundreds of these things, you need to be sure every time that you know how bright it is. And these things are called standard candles. And these are how we measure distances. And so the standard candle that was used before is this thing called Cepheids. You don't really need to know where the name comes from. All you need to know is that these are our rulers, effectively. These are stars where we can monitor them and we can work out how bright they are because their brightness is linked to their period. These things are variable stars. Our sun is bright. Every day it's the same brightness. We get up every morning, it's always there. But these variable stars, week to week, they can be very much dimmer or very much brighter than they were the previous week. Imagine living on a world like that, where you get up in the morning and you don't know if the sun is going to be roasting you or providing almost no light for you to go to work with. But these variable stars are important because their brightness is linked to their period. The guy that worked that out was a guy called Edwin Hubble. So with Hubble, cosmology really gets going. With Einstein, the ideas are there, the theory is there. But with Hubble, we have the observations that allow cosmology to begin as a science. Because Hubble used the Cepheids to work out distances to the nearest galaxies. 100 years ago, we didn't even know that galaxies were different. We didn't even know that stars existed in these island universes, which we call galaxies. We just thought that there were stars everywhere, and then we saw these things called spiral nebula. With people like Slipher and with people like Hubble, we realized that no, the universe is divided into island galaxies with darkness in between. So you have loads of stars, which we call a galaxy, maybe 100 billion, maybe less, maybe more. And then you have darkness, you have nothing. And then you have another galaxy, and another, and another. And so rather like, in the same way that our solar system is a point of brightness in the otherwise unimpeachable black, a galaxy is a collection of these stars in the infinite darkness that is the universe. But Hubble worked out something impressive. He worked out not only how far away these things are, but how fast they were moving. And he worked out that everything was running away from us. Every galaxy was moving away from our galaxy. And more than that, the further away they were, the faster they were moving. And this is the Hubble's law. This is the only equation that I'm going to write up on my slides today. So if you're already bored or already fallen asleep, it's fine. No more equations, I promise you. And Hubble's law is simply that the speed that a galaxy is moving away is proportional to its distance. And this constant is called the Hubble constant. Hubble wasn't an egoist or anything. No, in fact, he was a complete egoist. I mean, the man, yeah, he was a great scientist, but he also had a very high opinion of himself, which was fortunately borne out. So this is the idea of universal expansion. So the explanation of this is the universe is expanding, right? It's not merely that everything is running away from us, it's that everything's running away from everything. So if I come down here, for example, if you look over here, you have, imagine this is us, this is our point, and then you have two images, two photographs of time, of the universe at different times. You see that every galaxy seems to be moving away from every other galaxy. No, every galaxy seems to be moving away from that point, universally. But then if I shift it, if I recenter the images now so that the blue and the red circle are centered, you get a new image. But they're the same image of the universe, right? All that I've done is that I've recentered, I put the observer in a new place. It's just that space-time is being stretched. It isn't that there's a center to the universe and everything's running away from that center. It's that every point in space-time can be considered the center. And so you can be an observer on any galaxy, on any star, and look out and you'll see the same thing. The universe expanding, the distances, the velocities getting faster as you move further away. And so I moved again to a new point in the top right-hand corner. I'm now making observations from there, and you see that from there, it once again looks like everything's moving away from everything else. So this is the idea that then the expansion is not merely objects racing away from each other, but rather the whole of space-time being stretched and expanded. The universal expansion, the Hubble expansion. So that's the first of my tripod. The second is this idea of the cosmic microwave background. So this is the cosmic echo, the cosmic scream of creation. So back in 1965, these guys, who you can barely see that photo of, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, were doing some experiments into microwave transmission. They were interested in satellites, and so they built this massive microwave feed horn, and they were interested in using microwaves for communication. But what they discovered was that they always had this signal. There was like a background noise. Everywhere they looked in the sky, they could always see this signal. And what they assumed it was the pigeons crapping in their feed horn. They assumed that it was all down to the pigeon shit that they were accumulating, and there was no, and so they spent loads and loads of hours cleaning out their feed horns, pointing the feed horn in another direction, I don't know, shooting the pigeons with shotguns. They were sure that the signal was down to that. I think the paper is actually called On the Dielectric Properties of Pigeon Manure. But their conclusion was it wasn't the pigeons, that this signal was left over from the Big Bang. Imagine taking your microwave satellite dish today. Nobody has satellite anymore, everybody has cable, but this talk works a lot better about 15 years ago. Imagine taking your satellite TV dish and point it at a random area of the sky. You'll get noise, right? If you don't point it at the satellite, you don't get TV images, you get noise. But some of that noise comes from the electronics, some of that noise comes from the sky. but some of it comes from the Big Bang. What they discovered accidentally was the leftover radiation from the Big Bang. And so this was incredible. This was proof, in effect, proof that the universe had a beginning and that it was a hot beginning. So the way to think about this is that it's like looking up at the sky. If you look up on the sky on a cloudy day, all you see are the bottoms of the clouds, right? If you look away from the Earth, because the speed of light has a finite speed, then the further away you look, the further back you're looking, back in time. And so if you look really far away, you're looking right back to the beginning. But you can't look all the way back to the beginning, in the same way that you can't look above the clouds. You can only see the bottom layer of the clouds. If you go back to the beginning of the universe gets cloudy, effectively. It's full of gas, full of dust, full of hot gas. But that hot gas is giving off radiation. And so this radiation is then coming towards us. And today it reaches us in microwaves. And so this is a direct image of what the universe was like, not today, but what it was like 300,000 years after the Big Bang. And on a cosmological timescale, 300,000 years is just a tiny amount of time after the universe was beginning. But combine this then with the expansion of the universe, you realize that the universe, while today it looks cold and dark, look up there, you can't really see any light. It looks cold, dark, empty. But back 13 billion years ago, it was smaller. Because the universe is expanding, it must have been smaller in the past than it is today. And it was hotter because we see this radiation. So we have this idea now of the universe coming from a small, hot, dense region. And we can then look back and we can look at these anisotropies, these hot and cold spots on this surface, the original surface of which, when the universe was still sort of a gas, a ball of gas, a bit like the sun. That was the entire universe. That's an image of what the universe was like at the very beginning. So then finally, and I know that I'm starting to run out of time probably. Oh, excuse me. No, I'm going to carry on. We reached the final idea, the idea of nucleosynthesis. So not everybody believed in the Big Bang model when it became when it was posited in the 1960s. There's this guy called Fred Hoyle, and he didn't believe it. He had this alternate idea, the idea of a steady state universe. And his problem with the universe was, how do you create the elements, right? So this is the periodic table. We all know this, right? Hydrogen, helium, lithium, carbon, oxygen, all the elements. And his problem with the universe was, where do these come from? What is the mechanism that generates? Because for the Big Bang model to work, you just have to put them there, right? And he said, no. The way they come from is that they're all made in stars. All of these elements are made in nuclear fusion in the center of stars. So all the iron in your table, all the carbon in your trees or in your bread or in yourself, or the oxygen that you breathe, all of that comes from the nuclear fusion in stars. So that was great. And Hoyle was like, yeah, this definitely proves the universe didn't have a beginning. It's just an evolving, a steady state universe that's been there forever. But people went to him and, but I don't understand where the hydrogen comes from. Where does the hydrogen come? Where's the initial building block, that initial proton that you use to build everything else up? And so the Big Bang guys came back to him and went, no, wait. These elements, the hydrogen, the helium, the lithium, these come from the Big Bang. You're right about everything else. Every other element is formed in stars, not these ones, not these three. These three, they come from the Big Bang. And the way they worked it out was like this. You have some protons, which are the blue things, and you have some neutrons, which are the red things, and you have some radiations, some electrons, etc. So 1 second after the Big Bang, everything's kind of a mess. It's just a plasma. You have protons and neutrons kind of sitting around, these fundamental particles. But then after a while, the universe expands, it gets cooler, and they start to fuse together. So the protons and neutrons go together, or the individual neutrons decay. So you create this thing called deuteron, and then later on, you move it up to helium. And so you're building up these initial building blocks. So it's just you just need to create a little bit of those very, very low mass elements to set up everything else in the universe. And this is confirmed. We can observe this deuterium gas, this helium gas in the early universe, and we can go, okay, it works. The predictions of Big Bang nucleus work. So then finally, so this is where we are now. The Big Bang Theory places an early, smaller, hot universe expanding out into the large, cold, and dark universe we see today. And all the evidence of the expansion of the CMB, of the abundance of the primordial elements. But this is the question that I'm sure you're all dying to ask me. What caused the Big Bang? Where did it come from? What started it? So there is an idea of cosmological inflation. I'm not really going to run this through you, run this by you, but basically the idea is that before all of this, before this cosmic microwave background, before nucleosynthesis, before all of that, there was this infinitesimal universe that was expanded out, that was accelerated out by this period of inflation. And this solves certain problems that exist with the standard Big Bang model. But why do you need just one small region being inflated out? Why can't you have a sort of bubble universe? You start with some small region, you start with an entire universe which is expanding and accelerating, but after a while you generate these sort of bubble universes which look like our universe today. And this is good because you don't need a beginning, right? There's a kind of universal flow out there creating all these different universes, and some of them are the ones that look like ours, right? So there's no beginning to the universe. We just happen to be one in a kind of landscape of possible universes that might be created by this mechanism. It's kind of speculative, but it makes certain predictions, and it may be borne out by evidence. The other idea, which is kind of developing credence, is the idea of the pre-Big Bang model. So there's no beginning. Instead, we know the universe today is expanding, but the idea is that there was a sort of contracting phase. So you have an expanding universe today. You go back in time, the universe is still expanding but getting smaller and smaller. You hit some finite size, and then the universe expands out again. So there's a sort of a previous universe that existed before ours that was contracting, that was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It reached some finite size, it expands out again. So you have a kind of cyclic model where each previous universe in time feeds into the next one. So this doesn't have a beginning either. It just has a previous universe. So these are kind of speculative ideas. The internal inflation, the pre-Big Bang model, these are kind of models where we start to go, okay, how can we prove this? What's the evidence for it? How is it borne out by the theory? And I can't tell you which is right. I'm not even sure we're going to get there in the next few years, but they're basically ideas that we're currently working on. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to me.
All right. Any quick questions for David? Any questions?
I've blinded everybody with
12. You got a question for David, don't you?
One question. Is this going on TV?
Sorry?
Is this going on TV? It's going online.
Okay.
Oh, really? Oh, no.
13. Do you have a question for David about the Big Bang? Come on. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff.
Do you like pineapples?
There you go.
Yeah, in cocktails, pineapple's good.
See? Big Bang Theory all comes back to pineapples. Yes. Thanks, David. You, ma'am. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about the process of measuring the distance to stars? That was really good, and it would be good to have a bit more depth in it.
I'll try and get back there quickly. So this is what you're talking about, the idea of the distance ladder. So we build up, the only way to directly get measurements to nearby stars is this idea of parallax. So if a star is nearby and you observe it over the course of about a year, you see it very slightly shift its position on the sky. And this is just a geometric effect because it's in a slightly different position compared to the observer than it was 6 months ago than it is today. This is the only direct way to get the measurements to the nearby stars. After that, we have to start looking at, we have to use models. So we look at things like clusters of stars, which all form at the same time, And then we try and get their distances by the fact that they all form at the same time, they have the same properties. And then from there we get up to things like Cepheids in our own galaxy, and then beyond Cepheids we use things like supernova to get even further out, etc. So it's kind of a ladder. The bottom rung is definitely physical. The other rungs are based on physics that we understand and models, etc., and so may be subject to change depending on how our understanding improves.
Wow. Cool. So you had a question.
Hi, yes, about the Big Bang. I had a question. So at the original moment of the universe's creation, all matter expanded, I'm assuming from like a general point outwards. This might sound weird, but why isn't the universe then uniform in certain aspects? If matter is expanding and there was no external influence to affect it, the sun's forming and thing, why isn't like one side of the universe an exact parallel to the other side of the universe?
That's a really good question, actually. You're not. I don't know you. We haven't met before, right? You're definitely not a plant. So that the point here is gravity. That if you have that gravity causes tiny fluctuations to grow. So if you can start with even just one atom out of position, then it will attract things slightly more than the other atoms around it, and you can start with a sort of smooth field of atoms, but generate something that looks like a cloud and then a star, etc. So this is what's called gravitational instability. It causes structure to grow. But the question then comes: what causes these tiny things to be out of position? And for that, I refer you back. I was talking about inflation. So inflation is a quantum phenomena. It occurs from quantum space-time, and quantum space-time is kind of messy. And so that generates the kind of initial fluctuations which generate all the structure that we see in the universe today. And that's my 30-second answer.
Lovely. All right, let's have a big round of applause for David again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. That was quite amazing. I've got something to share. This will be good for you guys. Now, this is something I did when I was young. So I never quite understood how kind of big the sky was, right? I mean, you know that it's big, but you don't understand that it's big. So what you do is this is if you're good at yoga, okay? So what you do is you bend your knees and you take a point on the horizon. It works better if it's a cloudy sky or a starry sky, or there's something in the sky. Anyway, and you like look at that, and then you just like slowly bend back until you reach the other horizon. And it's really cool. Anyway, thanks. Cool. All right, we're going to have a short break. Everyone should try that. If you don't want to try that, we've got our telescope down there, which might save you some of the trouble. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back into the second half. We've got two feature speakers. I hope you're all teed up. I hope you've all been using the telescope, pointing nicely, beautifully up at the moon tonight. It's a lovely night. And I'd just like to see, usually I do this at the start, but can I just have a show of hands if this is your first Mad Scientist Tea Party? Wow. Wow, that's cool. That's cool. If you do enjoy the night, make sure you email and harass the State Library and say this is great and we want a return of this sort of thing, just so we can keep this stuff going and keep the funding happening, all that sort of stuff. How you going, boys? 12 and 13, kicking it? Yeah, rad. Awesome. There you go. Lingo. It's all sharing. And our very next speaker is Katie Francis, and she's going to be. It's science fiction, but it's the kind of the science of science fiction and all things science fiction with science added into it. So I don't know. I'll let her take it away. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Katie to the stage.
Okay, so I'm Katie. I have a science degree. I'm doing my honours in astrophysics. I'm actually in the same astro group as David, who spoke about the Big Bang. I'm here to talk to you about what science fiction says about the origins of the universe. For the most part, that would just be a repeat of David's talk, because most science fiction is based in science. So I'm going to split this up into some categories. But first of all, what is science fiction? Here's a few science fiction titles you might recognise. What I like about science fiction is that it's quite diverse. Unfortunately, that makes it really difficult to do a talk about, because you've got everything from really hard science fiction that uses real science, written mostly by scientists themselves, all the way to stuff that should really be in the fantasy category. It's more just mythical stories set in space. So it's really quite diverse. But what I like about it is that, for the most part, it is based in science, and that it takes these really interesting concepts from science and plays with them and says, what if? And takes it a bit further. I'm going to be talking about a few of these concepts, and then I'm going to be relating it to concrete examples from various science fiction programs, movies, books, etc. Unfortunately, that means that there will be spoilers. To try and minimise this, I'm mainly going to be talking about well-known movies and TV shows, most of which have already finished. So from the last 20 or so years. So if you haven't caught up on what's happened in those already, if you go on the internet ever, you're going to have them spoiled anyway. So I'm going to be talking to you about 4 main categories in the beginnings of the universe from science fiction. And also, like I said, I'm going to be talking about the well-known ones. So that means I'm probably going to leave out your favourite. I know how awful fandom wars can be, so please don't hate me. But what I want you to do is think about where your favourite does fit in with the categories I've formed, and I want to hear about it at the end. So don't jump up and down and get angry at me. Keep it till the end, and you can have your say about where your favourite fits. So the 4 main categories are science fiction, which uses basically just science to talk about the origins of the universe, so science fiction that includes the Big Bang. Again, that's not going to be a very big category because you've all heard David's talk. The next one is where there's a creation of a universe within our own universe. Well, the next 2 are that, really. The creation of a new universe from within our own. The first one being where it's a parallel universe which branches off from our own, and the second one is where it's a little mini universe within, that's sort of nestled inside our own universe. And the last one is magic. That's where all that fantasy science fiction stuff lies. Anything else that doesn't really have much of a scientific basis goes in the magic category. That's where really fun things can happen, but they're not usually that profound. So I'll start with things that talk about the Big Bang. Usually this is just strict Big Bang, it happened, and in fact most science fiction falls into this category. Because most science fiction that doesn't mention the beginning of the universe assumes that the Big Bang happened. Unless otherwise stated, the Big Bang happened exactly as science says in science fiction. Where it gets really interesting, sorry about that. Where it gets really interesting is where the science fiction starts to play on that, starts to use mainly the Big Bang and talk about the implications. It talks about some of the weirder aspects of it that David mentioned at the end of his talk. So, for example, Star Trek, Big Bang happened. Andromeda, Big Bang happened. But then you get to things like a book by an author called Robert J. Sawyer. Now, he's the person who wrote the book that the TV series Flash Forward was based on. Does a few nods, people recognise the name Flash Forward? So he wrote a book where the big bounce sort of thing happened, where you have these cycles of big bangs, universes collapsing, new universes forming. This happened in this book called Calculating God. The main character actually manages to go out, travelling close to the speed of light, and as he travels out, reaches the end of the universe and watches the end of the universe happen and helps cause the next universe to happen. Now, it is called Calculating God. It's not really about religion, it's a science fiction book, but in this science fiction book, it looks at if there were a deity that science could prove existed in the universe, what would the universe look like, what would happen if that were science. So it looks at it from the science point of view. And another really interesting thing that a lot of science fiction, mainly books in this particular category, look at is something called the anthropic principle. Why is the universe finely tuned for our type of life to form in it? Why, out of all the possible universes that could have formed with different elemental abundances, with different types of planets being able to form, maybe no planets at all, why did ours form? And a lot of the science fiction that looks at this puts forward the idea that, well, of course it did. We're here to notice that it happened. If it weren't right for us to exist, something else would be here noticing that it was exactly right for them to exist. So if you can imagine that the Earth was different in its formation history, so something actually a bit more recent, if the Earth formed the same way as it did in this universe, but had a different environment, all the animals on it would evolve differently, and then you'd have, green munchkin monsters wondering why they evolved. So I could go on forever on this topic because most of the science fiction available falls into this category. Also, keep in mind that a lot of science fiction will fall into several different categories. So it might be a universe that formed exactly the same as ours, but then the next two categories where a new universe forms within that universe also happens. Things like that. So the next category is where a new universe is created from within the old universe, but where this universe branches off and is parallel. This mainly happens in stories where there's time travel. This is the main easy way to see where this happens. So there's an episode of Stargate where the main characters, they travel back in time to around 3000 BC and they change something, and that alters history. So it causes a new universe to branch off at that point with a different history. And science fiction is quite split onto whether or not this is a problem. Some science fiction says this creates a paradox because the past is changed. How can the people from the future, who don't exist anymore because the future's changed, go back in time to change it? And other science fiction says, well, no, this isn't a problem. A parallel universe happens, so both things actually happen. So the people from the original universe go back in time and change it and then get stuck in the new branch. And then in this episode, people from the altered universe then go back in time to try and help the original universe people carry out their mission. So this is one example where a new universe is definitely branched off from the old one. And a lot of science fiction uses a concept from quantum physics, known as the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. So the way science fiction uses it is that every possible decision you could make that has two or more ways to go, all of these things happen in different universes. Now, the science is a bit more complicated, but that's the way it's used in science fiction. And it's not just conscious choices as well, but a coin flip. If that went differently, a different universe gets created in the science fiction. And what gets really interesting is when you can traverse these parallel universes. So, does anyone remember Sliders? Yeah, Quinn found a way to travel between these universes. Often he couldn't find out what was different until quite a while down the track because only one thing in the history was different. Now, in reality, if this were down to every single possible universe down to a coin toss was different, most of them you wouldn't know the difference, although they keep finding all these different ones where, misogyny is actually misandry, where different people won wars, things like that. They always find something major different. So that's that category. Remember, keep thinking about your favourite. Where does it fit in? Do you know any that are like this? I mean, probably do. Back to the Future? Uses time travel? Okay. Keep thinking. I'm going to be asking at the end. And then we get where you create a new universe, not just from within our own universe, but that resides within our own universe. It's embedded within our own universe. This is usually done in the forms of computer simulations. So the biggest one is probably the Matrix. So the real universe, like ours, exists, and there's a created simulated universe within that that's indistinguishable for the most part from the real universe. And it's only when things like this start happening that they realise it's actually is a simulation. There's even an episode of Star Trek where this happens. Creation of the computer in the simulated entertainment virtual reality room, the holodeck for people who actually know the series, manages to become self-aware. He realises that he's a computer program confined by the limitations of this computer. And he wants to go out and live in the world, break these confines. So what the crew do is they create a new computer program for him to live in that's really indistinguishable from reality and stick him in it rather than actually breaking him out of the computer. So they trick him because there's no way to actually break him out of the computer. And where a lot of novels, rather than movies or TV shows, take this one step further, is that they say, okay, physics tells us that something called the Planck length exists, which is debatably a lower limit to the length you can actually measure in the universe. Even with the most perfect detectors imaginable that are hundreds of years away, we can't measure below a certain point. That means that the universe is inherently pixelated, and not just in length, in time and in mass. So space itself, time itself, and things like mass are pixelated, and that leads some of these authors to say, this is evidence that we are ourselves living in a computer-generated reality within someone else's universe. So there's been quite a few science fiction novels and series related to this idea, and mainly short stories, really, because once you've said that, where can you really go with it? But it's quite interesting, and a lot of them also involve the previous topic of the many worlds. So a computer simulation where several of them are being run at once, and so you manage to hop out of this simulation into one of the other ones, etc. See, this is why I really like science fiction, because it takes this tiny little idea from science and just goes with it, and you can go to some really interesting places with it. And the last main category is magic. This is stuff that doesn't really have much of a basis in science. This is the things that just happen. The main culprit of this is Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who, but it's, for the most part, not really scientific. I mean, it invented wibbly wobbly timey wimey. I mean, that's an explanation of how time travel happens and works, and why paradoxes sometimes happen and sometimes don't, and why some events you can change and some you can't. It's fun, but it's not very scientific. So this is an episode where an entity called the House creates, somehow, this little bubble of a universe attached to ours, except the Doctor says, think of it like that, because it's nothing like that, so who knows what it really is like. So he creates that to try and draw TARDISes in so he can eat them. The show makes no mention of how this happens, why this happens, if it's even scientific that this could happen. It just did. And another episode of Doctor Who, this creature called the Beast talks to the Doctor about being there before time, before the Big Bang, before the initial event. And the Doctor wants to ask him how can that happen? And the creature just scoffs at him because he can't understand. But he doesn't explain. How can something be there before the Big Bang? We don't know. He won't even tell you. Magic. And there's another episode of Doctor Who, this time from the classic, where a time ship's time engines, which are jettisoned because they're going critical, explode, and because there's time energy, create the Big Bang by exploding within the universe where the Big Bang's already happened. Because it does. Still sounds cool, right? So yeah, Doctor Who is more the sugary ice cream of science fiction, whereas a lot of the hard science fiction, the Isaac Asimov, the Robert J. Sawyer, is the more meaty stuff, the stuff with real valid science. And Doctor Who does use some real valid science, but then it just kind of goes wee with it. Because it's meant to just be a bit of fun. So that brings me to the end of my 15 or so minutes. So now I want you all to think about, because you've already been meant to be thinking about it the whole time, where your favourite fits in. So I'm going to invite discussion about that. And not a real question time, because I'm not an expert in science fiction. I'm someone studying her honours in astrophysics. I like science fiction from a science point of view, but I'm not an expert, so I don't really want you to come and ask me questions like, episode 47, did you know about this happening? No, I don't. Okay? But how about you tell me?
All right. Who's favourite? Favourite show? Yes, sir.
I'm just curious to know where you'd categorise Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Are these on? I think it's kind of all of them, isn't it?
Yeah, same with like Futurama, which kind of...
Yeah, all these comedy ones often include a lot of the real science and the fun stuff.
Firefly? Any Firefly fans here? Yeah. Cool. Where would you think Firefly would sit?
And give examples too.
I don't care where it is, as long as we get some more episodes.
Some more episodes. Tell me about it. Serenity just killed me. It's very good. But Firefly is interesting because it's one of the only science fictions that has no sound in space. Except I think in Serenity they pretend that never happened as well, and they have a big explosion somewhere.
I think 2001 had no sound. Yeah, Babylon 5.
Babylon 5 as well. And anyone else? Come on. This is a mad scientist tea party, and no one's putting up their geek hands. We've got some geek love in the house. Come on. What about ladies up the back? Favorite sci-fi?
I don't know.
Tron?
Yeah, Tron with the when you were talking about computer-generated universes within our universe. That was quite cool.
Yeah, Tron. Good one. Any others for the... What was it? We've got Tron, which kind of covers the universe within a created universe within our universe. We've got something like Firefly, which is the first category. And then, is Doctor Who the only one with magic and with playing? Yes.
Once when I was about this age, I read a book about something happened and all the bridges and all metal turned to rubber. And I'd love to read that book now. Has anybody read it?
Anybody? The Rubber Book? No. Isn't that... you've read it? No. Isn't it interesting how many... every time I say I read science fiction, people go, oh, have you read this person? I'm like, no. And it's the same with fantasy. There seems to be 1,000 billion authors who are all awesome and you should totally read. I'm a big fan of Ursula K. Le Guin, who wrote like The Dispossessed and stuff like that.
But yeah, you try and do a talk on it.
Very dense science fiction. Yes.
One of my favourites is Star Trek, especially the time travel episodes and movies. There's a lot of conflicting things in the series and the movies that the view of time travel, whether or not it creates an alternative timeline or just erases and overrides the original timeline, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's self-contradicting.
They say that in, I think, excuse me for lowering the intelligence of the evening, but they say that in Austin Powers as well. They say, he talks about time travel, and he goes, oh, don't think about it too much, Austin, which is kind of for the audience. Any more?
Yeah, see, that's like the magic timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
This might be a bit humorous. Travelling through space, how many times you end up bumping into letters flowing through space? And look at the start of all the films.
Where does Star Wars fit?
Does Star Wars mention
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away? Magic?
Either magic or you're meant to assume the Big Bang happened, I think.
Yeah, right.
Did anyone else have an opinion on that?
I'd say it's probably one of the magic categories. You'd say magic for any one of those sci-fi shows that treats space like it's an ocean, that disregards laws of like there's no sound, there's no explosions really, and stuff like that. It's starships fighting really more like a nautical battle or a World War II dogfight than anything else. Everything's aerodynamic for some reason.
That's true. Okay, and we've got some more up here. Yes.
I'm just interested to know where you think aliens fit into it.
Ooh, personal favourite.
Yeah, out of those ones.
I don't know if they've mentioned the beginning. Does anyone know if they've mentioned a specific beginning in Aliens?
Has anyone seen Prometheus?
Because I think they don't mention it, which means that you're probably meant to assume that our universe's physics happened, so therefore the Big Bang.
Did you put your hand up because you've seen Prometheus?
There's an author called David Brin who wrote a fabulous series, and one of the fabulous scenes that he paints is sitting in a spaceship outside of space and time, peering back through a crack in space-time to see the universe itself, but from some unimaginable distance. And I think that it's really the first two. But one of my other favourites is the Discworld, which definitely fits within the magic.
Cool. So we've got Star Wars and Discworld and stuff which fit in the magic. We've got things like what did we say before? Created inside our own universe, Tron. And we're still stuck on number 2, but we'll just make this the last one because we've got to keep rushing along. Yes.
Yeah, I'm loving reading this book that I'm reading at the moment by a guy called Ian Pearce. It's called An Instance of the Finger Post, and I'd call it science fiction. It's actually done as a historical murder set in a time when some of the very, very great early scientists were all working closely together. And it's fascinating in the way that their scientific ideas were emerging out of a pool of what you would call magic ideas. And how that actually happens. I still don't feel as if I understand how science can emerge out of magic.
Discworld treats the magic wizard people like scientists at a university as well. And they kind of they talk about the science of the slow light through the magic field on the Discworld and things like that.
Right. Okay. Let's give a big round of applause for Katie. We got our geek love on. Thanks for that. All these mad scientist tea parties, and we haven't had a big sci-fi chat yet, so that's great. And I get to feel validated in some geekdom tonight. You're the only audience that I can really admit that I watch Firefly religiously in front of. Yay! Okay, we've got our very last speaker, and this kind of is a bit of a combination between what we will be talking about next time in our Mad Scientist Tea Parties. And his name's Daniel, and he's going to come up and deliver a talk. Oh, there he is. All about gaming, but in a particular game which I'm sure, looking around, that some of you have at least seen, if not spent a religious 40,000 hours upon. So I'll leave it in the capable hands of Daniel. Give him a big round of applause. He's the very last speaker for the very last Mad Scientist Tea Party.
Alrighty, good evening. The first thing I want to get out of the way is that I am a nerd. I was 7 when I read my first Savage Sword of Conan. Oh, come on. I was 13 when I laid waste to my first lot of orcs playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I was nearly 26 when I watched Frodo depart the Shire, only to realise that one does not simply walk up to Mordor. I have never played World of Warcraft, but have lived in houses surrounded by virtual mass murderers, whose idea of celebrating Christmas is to make American children cry as they venture online for the first time into the realms of Azeroth on a holiday morning. Now that the matter of facts are laid out in order, it's time to establish what it is I'm talking about this evening. Christ. Sorry. The Edge has been working in cosmology now for the past 4 months. Next month we're moving into gaming. Tonight I'm speaking to both of those themes and looking at the stories that underpin the World of Warcraft. It'll be slightly a potted history, and any errors that are up on the presentation tonight are my own. World of Warcraft is a massively multiplayer fantasy role-playing game. It is the persistent world where players pay to play and grow in a virtual world that involves commuting from place to place. I have watched people wait for the imaginary boat with a book on their desk because they missed the last boat by a couple of minutes and the next boat doesn't arrive for another 15 minutes. The World of Warcraft is not new. It is not new in its character designs, voices, motifs, or narratives. It is in its entirety has been appropriated and remixed from sources themselves that are appropriated and at times were sued by the estates of dead authors. It is a funny thing in the fantasy genre, especially from the gaming side of things. The lineage is pretty obvious. It's often shouted out in the text with hidden Easter eggs, thank you notes in introductions, and sometimes blatant ripping off of minor name changes to make everyone feel better about the plagiarism. To bring the conversation to some historical context about this wholesale conceptual piracy is the word orc. Orc is the Old English word for demon, popularised by J.R.R. Tolkien in his Lord of the Rings and Hobbit saga, which is the original spreadsheet template for fantasy gaming. Old wizard, salesman, dying man tells small, defenceless creature that they are to journey into terrible danger through a world that wants to eat them, usually accompanied by equally defenceless and useless companions who learn the true depth of friendship, struggling to bring order, good, light, to a world threatened by chaos, evil, darkness, by descending into the heart of chaos, evil, darkness, to emerge the heroes bearing the elixir that will heal the land. Joseph Campbell would have been very proud. After all, who is Luke Skywalker at the beginning of Star Wars, if not Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring? Dropping a ring into a volcano is like dropping a torpedo in a ventilation shaft, what cookies and cream ice cream is to cookie dough ice cream. Same, but different. Sorry, that was a very awkward metaphor. Tolkien did not refer to his creatures as orcs in The Hobbit. He called them goblins. When the time came for The Lord of the Rings, they became orcs because the word sounded more appropriate. Orc. It's a phoneme. It sounds mean and like what it means. Originally spelt with a C, Tolkien later wanted to change it to a K, but never got around to doing it in anything other than the adventures of Tom Bombadil. The man managed to rewrite the lunar cycles in The Lord of the Rings to coincide with The Hobbit and send the third reprinting, but he couldn't change the K. Squat, broad, flat nose, sallow skin with wide mouths and slant eyes, prone to cannibalism and possessing a hatred of daylight and men, orc has become the default word in fantasy referring to man-sized creature with a foul temper that heroes kill. There has been some revisionist work done on the image over the years, even especially within the World of Warcraft itself, where they have moved from the antagonist to a protagonist species. They stopped eating one another, adopted a noble savage image, and shrugged off their dark heritage to become more heroic. The same thing has happened to dark elves, but that's another story for another telling. Orcs ceased being solely Tolkien's domain in the late 70s when two wargamers from Lake Geneva, Gary Gygax and Dave Arnson, changed the shape of wargaming forever. Ever since H.G. Wells' Little Wars, which is widely acknowledged as being the world's first published war game rules, people have been arranging historical armies ranging from the Babylonian era, and by Babylonian I mean the historical era and not Babylon 5, which is awesome. Thank you. Through civil wars in Afghanistan against one another. They usually involved small lead or more recently plastic figures that have been lovingly painted, which is one of the prototypical visions of a nerd. Hunched over a table, fingers stained with the paint as they try to paint an eyeball onto an inch-tall metal figure. Gary Gygax had written a supplement for his Wargaming Rules chainmail that allowed for fantasy creatures to become involved in the games. No one had ever done this before, and it caught on across that early 70s American gaming subculture that had been swept up in that post-Woodstock discovery of the Lord of the Rings, which had something to do with pipeweed. It's like Scooby Snacks and Magic Dragons. It's a metaphor. Right, I'll move on. 20 years later, Blizzard Entertainment would release a real-time strategy game called Warcraft: Orcs vs. Humans, and then its stupidly popular sequel, World of Warcraft 2: The Dark Portal, which today, alongside its thematic cousin StarCraft, is still the yardstick by which real-time strategy games are measured. There are still tournaments that are televised in Taiwan for StarCraft. Without Gary Gygax, there is no World of Warcraft. The man is to gaming what Donald Bradman is to cricket, a legend that rests in peace and lives in our memories. At the same time, Dave Arneson was scaling his chainmail game back from whole armies to just one man who would level up as they gained experience raiding deep underground complexes, killing things that lived there and stealing their stuff afterwards. It was a game of justifiable home invasion. There came the day when these two men met and swapped notes. Their relationship would have its ups and downs over the 30 years leading to their deaths. There were huge times they did not talk to each other and they slagged each other off across fandom. It was amazing. But their legacy to geek culture and gaming is on the same scale as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Between these two men's reinterpretation of the war game, the role-playing game emerged. It took the childhood cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians, doctors and nurses, added a rule framework that governed kicking the living bejesus out of monsters, and called itself Dungeons and Dragons. This was the progenitor role-playing game. Hundreds have risen and fallen in its wake. It is the game that in the beginning of E.T., all the kids are seeing they're playing a game. It's Dungeons and Dragons when they hear that alien walking outside. In the early editions, the game included use of the word hobbit and balrog, which was then redacted to halfling and type 4 demon after Tolkien's estate sued the living crap out of TSR Games. Like modern computer gaming, it was said to encourage antisocial behaviour and worship of the devil. It was at the same time period that the Texas school system called for the banning of Space Invaders. It was too violent, and its nihilistic storyline too dark. Space Invaders had a storyline. Who'd have thought? Players of Dungeons & Dragons have included Matt Groening, Vin Diesel, Robin Williams, Dame Judi Dench, Stephen Colbert, and here's my personal favourite, The Rock, and me. From the world of fantasy role-playing, worlds have emerged. Kryn, Toril, Flan, Glorian, Tekkamul, the Wilderlands, Mystra, Blackmoor, Ravenloft, Athos, Aberon, Azeroth, the world of Warcraft. The list goes on and on. Worlds that have spanned quite literally millions of pages and are as vivid in players' minds as they are any literary work or movie. These are places where fantasy alter egos, their player characters, have adventured, bled, and died in. Their bones are the stuff which legends are built on. Their worlds are inspired by the works of Tolkien, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Michael Moorcock, the creator of the prototypical emo in Elric of Melniboné, and H.P. Lovecraft, the father of cosmological horror and the man you can directly blame for Stephen King. These worlds have inspired the computer role-playing game. Because computer role-playing games started, arguably, with the text games Adventure and Zork. Computer-based choose-your-own-adventure novels that, if you are in your 30s or older and a nerd, there's a good chance you spent many hours awash in amber or bright green glow trying to figure out where the sword goes and the what's it to open the door, and how do you phrase that in a way that the computer understands. Zork was one of the most popular games of its time. In its wake, the adventure game and then the computer RPG emerged. Bard's Tale was one of the first on the Commodore 64 and Amstrad. Does anyone here actually own an Amstrad at any point in their life? Wow, don't we all feel very small and isolated now? You were a party of brave adventurers seeking the rod of power that would heal the world. You started out with, I think, now please forgive me, it's been 30 years. I think you started out with 5 gold pieces, and then you needed to wander across the land and kill as many things as possible so you can get enough money to either buy the rod or find the rod. Or you could create a party, transfer everybody's gold to one party member, and then kill everyone else in the party, save the game, start up with a new party and bring that character in, and repeat and rinse until you had earned 1.5 million gold pieces. There is nothing sociopathic about that at all. And this was the first example of what is known as grinding. Bard's Tale would be joined by Ultima, Baldur's Gate, Fallout, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Breath of Fire, The Elder Scrolls, Dragon Age, Breath of Fire, and God knows how many other seemingly millions of titles over the years. Where all these were a single-player experience, the idea of emulating a group of people around a table burgeoned online when the online world took hold. Nearly on the first day you could have internet at home. MUDs. Multi-user dungeons emerged with text-based gestalt spaces where players could kill things together and form online textual relationships that were not always appropriate, and I mean that in the Shane Warne sense of the term. People only knew the virtual projections of themselves and not the people on the other side of the keyboard. The classic image, I used Boss Hog because I didn't want to put a 47-year-old, 180-kilo truck driver photo from the internet up here in case of being sued, called Bill, would be pretending to be a 16-year-old elf shield maiden called Tink. Where previously you could see the players on the other side of the table, now you only had their online voice and avatar. Identity got a whole lot harder to define and just a little bit creepy. Jumping ahead, EverQuest came into being, and the stories of online gaming addiction began the very next day. This was one of the very first massively multiplayer online graphical role-playing games. People got married in EverQuest. They built houses together and chose drapes. Psychiatry would tell of online game addiction and the risk presented by isolation induced by online gaming. There were deaths where people forgot to eat and sleep while playing. It was a persistent online world that allowed you to kill things without being criminally liable. The best part about this was a subscription model that it was built upon, where people paid monthly as opposed to buying the disc once and never paying you again. It was like the slot machines of gaming. Second Life emerged in the years after this, a massively multiplayer online role-playing game where there was nothing to do. Blizzard released its unrelated game, Diablo, and there were rumours of a new game would be coming out to challenge EverQuest's dominance in the market. Set in this world of Azeroth, the world of Warcraft. There was a lot of scoffing at the time. The question whether there was room for another game in the marketplace came up, and nerds round the world were waiting with bated breath. World of Warcraft was launched on the 10th anniversary of Warcraft Human vs. Orcs in 2004. At its peak, it had 12 million subscribers paying an average of $15 a month to play. Today, it has 10 million subscribers and a gross revenue of more than $1.5 billion per year. This does not include the ancillary market, where the real world and the virtual world intersect, with Eastern European and Asian gold miners, which are people who play World of Warcraft to collect gold in-game and then sell it via eBay to wealthy Americans. In real world dollars, which in some cases is actually contributing whole points to the country's GDP. Recently, the entire world of Azeroth has been rebuilt in Minecraft, which is weird. My last thought, and this is what I'll leave you with before having briefly where we're going to now. My flatmate was flying his dragon one day in World of Warcraft from one side of the map to the other to meet up with my other flatmate who was sitting literally 3 meters away in the next room, so they could go into a dungeon and kill something. The trip took half an hour. I walked into his room and I said, "Dude, you're commuting." He just looked up from the book he was reading and he said, "Dude, by dragon." I think you might have had a point. So thank you very much for coming this evening to our Mad Scientist Tea Parties. This is the last of our cosmology series, which has been we've really enjoyed having people here for. Next month we move into gaming, as I mentioned earlier, and we will be having more of these talks. They're just going to have a bit of a change of shape and be focusing on gaming. Now, when I say gaming, I don't mean we're going to have hideous amounts of computer gaming stuff so that we can all get really scared. We're looking at things like alternate reality games, gaming and education, and the history of the board game. The format's going to shake up a little bit. It'll probably be inside to avoid getting fried outside. And also there'll be an opportunity for a lot of social gaming to be happening. By social gaming, we mean checkers, chess, Monopoly. Monopoly's not really social because people get angry. So thank you very much for coming tonight. My name is Daniel Flood. I'm the creative production manager here at The Edge, and it's been wonderful to have you here. So thank you very much.
Two. Are you taking questions, Dan?
All right, yeah, why not?
Yeah.
Questions?
Any questions?
Anyone?
World of Warcraft, gaming, nerddom, all those sort of things. You didn't mention Final Fantasy.
I did mention Final Fantasy briefly, and that was a
okay.
game that consumed, I think last time I checked, 98.7 hours of my life.
Yep.
As I wanted to kill everything in the world.
Yes. Last time I checked, my Final Fantasy X time limit was on the red 99 hours.
Excellent. Good for you. That's awesome, Scott.
No, it's not. It is to other Final Fantasy nerds, but anyone else, it's kind of pathetic. Yes, 13.
Do you play Minecraft?
No, for the same reason I don't play World of Warcraft, because I would find that my partner would have left me.
That's not a good excuse.
Oh, no, that is...
Go home.
Well, going to. I agree with you at 13. It's not an excuse. At 36, it's the only excuse.
You guys, I mean, when I teach kids, they get on Minecraft at lunchtime and they play in their worlds. Do you do that?
Yes, very often. I get in trouble a lot.
So do you have a world that you've created as well, and do you keep going into that world each time?
No, so stupid computers delete my world after 2 minutes of exiting it.
Okay, so you start again each time. Wow. Okay. Any other questions? Maybe if they're video game related. This is great. We've had some sci-fi and some gaming stuff happening. Come on, nerd love. Let's get the nerd love happening. I noticed David having a massive laugh. Were you a text-based gamer?
Yeah, I'm kind of at that age where I played games like Zork. Many an hour spent playing Zork, I have to say. But I have a question for you. I mean, do you feel now that the big community-based games like World of Warcraft are marginalising the more creative, that people just want to play games, they don't want to build their own worlds anymore, that they're just happy to buy things off the shelf, that the creativity is kind of being left behind?
I think it's a bit of both, because I think there is that market of, like, there is, I won't lie, there's a downside to massively multiplayer games and those games that chew up your entire life, because they do. To reach the top level in World of Warcraft, and if you know exactly what to do, it takes 600 hours to get from level 1 to level whatever it is now after the latest expansion pack came out last week. So I think there is that, but I also think it's interesting then to see the level of gaming and the kind of demographic. I was speaking with a librarian from the State Library New South Wales who actually runs lectures in World of Warcraft, and she uses it as a platform for people to actually meet and discuss game theory and game ideas. So I think, and I also think it's only been around for like 9 years now, which is a really small period of time, and I think it's an evolving understanding. So, but yeah, I'm also of the era where, the devil was in records you played backwards, so it's hard to tell.
And I guess what about something that I've been curious about for a while is what happens to those sort of communities and the way we interact with each other when you're online, because I'll admit I'm a big gamer, but I don't actually have any next gen consoles. I've got a Wii. And I'm intimidated because a lot of the online gaming that occurs now, especially in shooters, there's a lot of microphone talk, and people are like really racist and really prejudiced and swearing heaps, and you get like these 14-year-old kids who are like, it's just bam, bam, bam at you all the time. So what happens there in terms of our communication, and is it that kind of Facebook syndrome where it's a safe space to be a douche?
I think it is a lot. It's about the faceless nature of it, because when you're actually there is no moderation in a lot of these servers. So you log on and you can have any twit with an idea who in a microphone can yell at you. And I actually don't play a lot of online games just for that purpose, because they make me angry. And then being an angry person with a postgraduate degree means you start hurling abuse back at them that doesn't have swear words in it, and then they get confused, and then they go, "Ooh, you're just an idiot." And I go, "Okay, I'm gonna leave now, before you shoot me." Which is also the strange dichotomy of this kind of vaguely sociopathic approach to gameplay. It's kind of like, yes, I will reward you for killing 14 million people. And it's like, okay, I'm going to stop now and play Bejeweled. Not really.
And I guess, like, what about a positive? Like, we're talking...
There's
the last kind of... We've sort of brushed a little bit on some of the negative things. But what about the positive?
Beautiful games out there where... there's a game which has copped a lot of press recently called 0 Day, which is a big zombie plug-in for something else. And there's a guy wandering around that, because there's no reward for being nice in that game, but there's a guy wandering around being a medic and healing people just because that's what he wants to do.
That's the game where there's a zombie outbreak and you're basically on your own in that, and people will do really nasty things for a can of beans, etc. Like it's basically a zombie simulator.
Yeah, it is, but it's also interesting to see that even in those contexts, people don't buy into it and they choose to. And I think that's the interesting part where gaming is coming to. You see individual choice and people breaking the mold. Like I think back in Second Life, there were protests people mounted inside corporate offices where they just came and sat there and wouldn't leave. And I think that kind of level of action is really interesting in a game context as well.
Yes.
Ooh,
hands popping up now. Yeah. I'll go over to this gentleman because he was just a bit quicker. Yes.
Just a quick question in regards to the presentations for next year. Are you going to be looking at them in regards to a sociological aspect in regards to people doing positive things, but also the effects that it's having in the real world? Because internet addiction has only been recently added to the DMV, which is a classification for mental health issues.
Yeah.
So are you going to be looking at the impact that, particularly in this short period of time that's been happening, like 6 years, that it's having in the real world?
Yes, we will be. Part of one of our talks is the one on gaming and education. We'll be examining. There's some really interesting research coming out of Europe where one school's chemistry class had been turned into a Harry Potter's alchemy studio, and what they did was all the students were creating potions, but they were essentially creating real formulas. And the retention level of the students of the information was vastly improved just because of placing it within a context they could actually grasp onto. So we'll be looking at both sides of both the positive and negative issues wherever we can, because I think that's where the interesting information lies. I can't report to be an expert in internet addiction other than living with people who play World of Warcraft, where you would watch them come home from work, spend 16 hours, sleep 4 hours, go to work for 8 hours, which I think means they spent more time in World of Warcraft than they did in the real world. And that would happen for years, like years and years of time. So yeah, I think there's I agree. It's a fascinating subject we'd love to talk more about and find someone who can talk to it as well.
And we'll just take this question and this one up the back. Yes.
Sort of going back to actually the previous talk as well. These gaming worlds, are they almost, they're almost like the simulations within the universe that we were talking about before, universe within the universe. At what point would these simulated worlds be almost considered a universe, and where do you see the future of these worlds going? Like, they get more and more complex with the technology, and I mean, thinking science fiction way, like when would we be able to essentially produce a universe ourselves, like within this simulated world?
If you're talking about a universe where you don't have NPCs with free will, I think we're pretty much there. World of Warcraft is a circular world. You can wander the whole world around. So I think the game that exists within a server is essentially its own universe in a lot of ways. I think you're right, the complexity gets more and more in depth the more we go, and the more computing power and algorithmic processing around the capacity for computers to be more and more real and lifelike. So I think it's that kind of evolution of when do we look at Terminator and the Skynet solution kind of situation, I think, and the Matrix. It's we are we all watch Matrix. Oh, it's fun. It's never going to happen, and you kind of go. I remember watching a great old episode of you watch the Twilight Zone, they have black and white ones, and what they thought was going to be happening by today, and some of it's way off. We'd be in silver jumpsuits and flying, but then they've still got phones on cords. So I think that that futuristic visioning from the 60s of what the year 2000 would look like is, it's really hard to tell what it'll be now. 10, 20 years from now, will we be in Inception land, I suppose?
There's a really great song by a Melbourne hip-hop artist called Seth Sedtree, and it's about thanking science and saying, thanks to science, you've done heaps, but where's my hoverboard? Yeah. Last one.
I'm actually an old school pen and paper gamer. Do you think that online gaming and sort of the advances in, like you were saying, the new technology and stuff will do away with people playing old school games?
Hasn't yet. And I'll freely admit, being a massive nerd, every Wednesday night we try and disprove that. I think it is an interesting conundrum that young people have it. Pen and paper role-playing game was actually a really small market share when it was at its peak. I think in 1991 or 92, D&D had 8 million players. So I think a lot of the companies now are trying to figure out how do you translate people back from the computer into the pen and paper and into that social experience. And there's been a lot of work that's been done in that area by those companies that produce those games, because they've ignored the younger market now for 20 years. And suddenly they realise, I've got a game tomorrow where the average age is 50. So we need to get new people playing. So if there's any young people who want to play Dungeons & Dragons, come and talk to us later.
Cool. All right, thank you, Daniel Flood. Give him a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a invigorating discussion of all things. This has kind of been the first Mad Scientist Tea Party where I've really kind of understood what people are talking about when you're talking about sci-fi and gaming. So I feel, yes, smartish. Thank you for coming tonight. We have run a bit over time, but that's mainly because everyone's been interested in putting up their hands to ask questions. I'd really like to extend a special thank you to all of the Edge staff for putting on such a great event. It is one of the events where I can come to and host and not feel like my awkward personality is different to anyone else's, if that makes any sense. I'd like to thank all the speakers that hopped up tonight for their five-minute speeches. Can you all give them a round of applause? That was Nick, Anna, and Mick. And also our 3 feature speakers as well. Could we all give them a round of applause too? I'd like to thank 12 and 13 for keeping us humble. You got to have some kids around to stir the pot a bit, keep us all humble. It's beautiful. And I'm Scotty, Darkwing Dubs. I'm a poet, and I've got no idea what most people talk about when they talk about science, but I'm here each time, and I love it. So hopefully we'll see you at the next one's all about gaming. I've lost my sheet, as I usually do, about when the next one is going to be. December. Awesome. Next one's in December. Keep an eye on The Edge online, like it on Facebook, and make sure you email The Edge and say, top work. Thanks. Have a great night. It's a beautiful night. See ya.